Come one, come all to the Commissioner's Choice Awards. This is the first annual Commissioner's Choice Awards. This is my alternative to the Game Awards because we know we cannot trust the Game Awards to give us integrity. So I'm just going to give you the rundown of what I consider to be the best and most enjoyable games of 2024. First of all, I thought this year was good. I thought it was going to be, originally I thought it was going to be maybe better than even last year, but last year was, in retrospect, a very good game. Year for games, let's say. But this year was solid. Definitely some good games this year. There's still a lot of games to come, actually. It's only December, but we're going to go ahead and have a curtain fall for this year. And I'm just going to go through the categories. Some of these will be familiar. Some of these I've kind of just made up for fun. And I'm not going to go through all the nominees because that would just be, I think, a waste of time. We're not going to sit here and make the same mistake as the Game Awards for 2 hours. So we're going to start with the bottom of my list. The very first award is very coveted. You see, it's sort of, you could say, the equivalent of the best actor or best actress in this case of the year. So we've got the Best Waifu Award. Now this is kind of self-explanatory if you're knowledgeable about gaming, or let's say anime terminology. We're gonna go with the Best Waifu Award. Now, of course, we do have to have some nominees for this, and I'm gonna nominate, a couple of characters from my favorite games this year. We've got the girls from Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. They got that infinite cake, if you know what I'm talking about. We have, of course, Eve from Stellar Blade. She was making the rounds this year. I don't think her game is that great, but we're going to be fair, and we're going to nominate Eve for the award as well. And you're probably thinking right there, that should be the winner. But to be honest with you, I'm going to go with Tifa from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is the Best Tits Award. We're going with Titty Tifa. I haven't even beat the game, but I'm sorry, I just have to give it to Tifa. This is actually the definition, when you look in the dictionary, of fan service, and I just think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Probably not the best character, probably not the most interesting protagonist, or NPC, if you will, party member, but I think that she, she's front and center this year, and I have no problem giving some recognition where it's due. We're going to give Tifa the award for the Best Waifu. Moving on in the list, because we don't have all night, we have the Most Underrated Game of the Year. Again, I can only go off of the games that I have played myself. In my opinion, V Rising was a lot of fun. I thought it was a very nice twist on sort of the top-down action RPG formula, and as well as a nice twist on the survival and crafting systems that are pretty popular these days. I felt that it was a lot similar to Minecraft, and actually going back and playing Minecraft recently, this game has a lot of quality of life improvements over Minecraft, especially the menu systems and the sorting, and it's just like a top-down version of that game, but with some really good action RPG combat sprinkled on top of that. I think Dracula was probably the toughest boss, one of the toughest bosses in the game, certainly this year that I've played. And I just thought that V Rising was a lot of fun. It came and went very fast, but, because it wasn't perfect, it did have some sort of, not pay to win, but to play on certain servers, they wanted you to pay money. That was kind of one of the drawbacks, and the end game, the lack of an end game was it was disappointing, but I had a lot of fun for like 150 hours that they put into that. I think that's one of the more underrated games of the year. So I'm going to put V Rising at most underrated. Good game for sure. Now we're moving into the most disappointing category, as I've already kind of hinted at. In my opinion, Stellar Blade is the most disappointing game for me personally. Now, I understand a lot of people still enjoyed Stellar Blade for what it was, but for what it was is not what I wanted it to be. If you're looking at this from the perspective of a veteran of the character action genre, this was a game that I looked at years ago. This was a game I looked at years ago when it was just simply known as Project Eve. I looked at this as sort of what I kind of subconsciously viewed as the next Bayonetta, but
Watch this, watch this. Ah! Oh! You're right, I definitely wanted to see it.
Oh my god! Oh my god, I love this game!
It certainly is not the next Bayonetta. In fact, almost every single aspect of game design was handled better 15 years ago. So you can't tell me that this is a good quality game when it does nothing to improve upon genre that's really been stagnant for the better part of the last decade. Yes, we have had, Devil May Cry 5, if you want to consider the God of War reboots as part of that. But we have not seen the days of vintage Capcom and Platinum games, and we're not going to see that again, really, ever, I don't think. So, Stellar Blade, if you like, the physics, let's say, it's not so much the gameplay physics, but, the animation physics. Yeah, I understand people like Stellar Blade for that, but again, 15 years ago, we had Bayonetta better in every way. Just ahead of this category is the biggest fall off. Now, there's a lot of games. You could put Concord here, but the thing about Concord is it never had heights to begin with. That's kind of a category of its own, maybe one of the worst flops in history. What I've observed is there's a lot of games that fall off. There's just a lot of trends that come and go. So you have, X Defiant, which I talked about previously, just officially announced that they're shutting their servers. It's very hard for, as I said in my V Rising review, it's very hard for trends to stay alive in this economy and this climate culturally. Uh, and so Helldivers was very, very popular when it came out. Honestly, I think a little bit overhyped. The game was only good, I think, with friends. I don't think this was a game that was ever supposed to be successful long term. They had a lot of good ideas, but the execution wasn't the best. They didn't really have a great progression system. They didn't really have an end game in sights, and it was just kind of a very repetitive formula. I think on a technical level, the game was impressive, the graphics and the scale of the battle zones, but for this game, it still has players, but judging from where it was at its peak, I would say for a game that was very prestigious as well as had a lot of players, to me, this is kind of confirmation bias, but for me, Helldivers is the biggest fall off. Had huge hype, and then they found ways to not only piss off their community, but I think really what I predicted was over the course of months, players would start to see through the veil and that it wasn't that great of a game to begin with. So potentially some of the other games I've mentioned should be on here, but I think Helldivers for me is the biggest fall off a game that went from being kind of fun to play with friends to a game I'll never play again and never look at again. Now we have the most overrated category. I'm doing, a mixture of games that are positive or awards that are positive and then, giving some criticism here. For me, there's a couple of games, again, Stellar Blade comes to mind, Helldivers comes to mind. Astrobot, I think, is a little bit overrated. I still actually think Astrobot is a decent game. That's actually a decent platformer for sort of the casual platformer player. Good game, I think, for kids. One of my problems with it, though, is that it's high on nostalgia, and then they kind of were oddly selective with the games that they decided to advertise. They kind of omitted a lot of the great games from the past that I think could have been on there, but they did have, some charming moments. But that is a little bit on the overrated side. It certainly was overrated on Metacritic. I don't think it should be one of the nominees, not anywhere near the top list. But what I actually think is the most overrated, and I'm going to go based on sales because it sold, I think, the most of any game this year, that would be Black Myth Wukong. I think it's overrated. And actually, it was a game that I was looking forward to myself. I did not, I did not buy the game. I did not play the game fully, but disclosure, I did play some of it in share play. I had enough experience fighting some of the bosses. I did beat the final boss in share play. So, in my mind, of course, I'm not qualified to judge the entire game, but I have seen people playing it. I did play some of it myself. And what I've discussed with other people is it, and the critics seem to agree with me. It's not a very highly scored game by the critics, and I suspect that a lot of the sales might have come from China as well. Like I don't know how this game sold as many as it did. Perhaps that's just me being cynical. I'm sure it did sell, a decent amount in Europe and America and that kind of thing. But I don't care what YouTubers say about this. I think it's overrated. You can't look at this and then look at something like Shadow of the Erdtree or God of War, the reboots, and think that there's much of a progression. This is another game like Stellar Blade, which I think has good visual presentation, but that's all that games are going for these days. The repetitive nature of the game structure and game design is really what's weighing down the industry. And I think the gameplay is okay in Black Myth, but it's nothing exceptional. This is not, this is once again not the next pillar of the action genre that we're seeing. Not at all. And that's a good segue into my award for the bottom half of my list. We're gonna go with peak art style, the best art direction of the year. There's only two games in my mind for this consideration. That would be Metaphor, Refantasio. But I actually do think the award does deserve, if we consider Shadow of the Erdtree. If we consider Shadow of the Erdtree, that would actually be, I think, the game that nudges it out. But Metaphor, also a very beautiful game. Space Marine had good graphics. A lot of these games could be nominated. Again, graphics are looking really good in video games now. But in terms of like art style, when you look at the human touch that's involved with these games, I think Metaphor, with its signature anime art style, the signature Atlas style, they have such incredible attention to detail in their games. Their character models in particular, and even usually the worlds that they inhabit, completely pop out of the screen. Of course, the UI, if we have an award for best UI, it would be Atlas. I think Atlas deserves special recognition as the best overall developer of the year. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now moving on to my top tier of the list. Now, honestly, these are going to go real fast. This might as well just be the Atlas Awards. This might as well end up being, an Atlas fanboy video. But again, this is, no different than the Game Awards, no different than the Oscars. Sometimes there is one video game, one movie, one album that wins it all. Sometimes you win all the Grammys in one ceremony. So, best narrative, I think it's Metaphor. The thing about Metaphor, it isn't necessarily the best narrative for a video game. It might not be the best narrative for the medium. But my thoughts on this are, it does have the best kind of conversations I think that any game has had this year. I think it's the most philosophical story in a game this year from what I've seen. Very interesting, great cast of characters, great production values all the way around. But this game touches on religion and politics in such a mature and insightful way that normally this would not be the kind of subject material for a game. People would probably agree with that. Some people might get taken out of the immersion a bit, but not for me. So I think it's the best narrative. Again, this can only be what I judge from the games that I've played, but I think that if you played all of these games that would be nominated, this would probably be what you agree with. I don't think it's going to be Final Fantasy Rebirth. You want to talk about being too anime, what do you think is worse in that regard? I think that the maturity level that Atlas has reached with its writing is perhaps peaking here with Metaphor, and I don't know who's doing better writing in the mainstream, AAA space than they are these days. So we're going to move on to Best Original Soundtrack. Now this is, if you know how I feel about remakes, I'm not a big fan of remakes. I don't think they should be getting nominated, especially for the top tier awards. But I'm actually going to give Persona 3 Reload, which was mysteriously snubbed at the Game Awards. This would be my choice for the best original soundtrack. Yes, there are a lot of remixes on here, but I very much enjoy them. I very much enjoyed the new singer Azumi Takahashi. And the original soundtrack, the actual new songs that they produced, were certified bangers, as the kids like to say. I think it's close to being a 10 out of 10 soundtrack. It's, Atlas, again, They have the best of both worlds, the best music and the best art style in their games, and I would give this to Reload. Liked it a little bit more than Metaphor, or trying to think if there's any other games this year that could have been in contention for best soundtrack. It would be my choice. It would be my choice for the best OST. Best game direction, I've already mentioned it. I think it's Metaphor. If you've watched my Metaphor videos, what I love about Atlas is that they really show you can always detect the human presence in their games. You can tell that these games were made by people, that they weren't made by artificial intelligence. You have the signature touch of the designers on display at all times. That would be Katsura Hashino as the director, Shigenori Soejima as the character portrait designer, as the chief artist, and the amazing Shoji Meguro, I think the greatest composer in video game history. Those three and all of the people working with them on the project. To me, Atlas has done so much this year. They have multiple games that could be nominated for almost every category. And so, as I said in my Metaphor review, one of their games has got to win the top-notch awards this year. And I'm going to give them not only best direction, but best studio this year. And I'm not going to prolong this too much. We have two more awards. We have the obvious game of the year, and we have what should be actually the most important is best gameplay. I'm going to have, because video games we have really been blurring the lines of what a video game actually is. So I'm going to do an award called best gameplay. And for me, I would say the best gameplay would have to go to, I'm going to actually go with Space Marine 2. Space Marine 2 was actually one of my considerations for the most disappointing game of the year, simply because even though I wasn't that excited for it when it came out, I loved the gameplay so much. I just did not like what I considered to be an unfinished product. Not much of a progression system, not much content at launch, and the idea that they want to stretch content out for months, like have content drip, is complete nonsense. You have a $60 game and you don't want to release content for it at launch. You want to have bad servers and low player counts and just like low players in the lobby. You had an amazing art style, an amazing throwback to like Gears of War style third-person shooter action. I love the gameplay. I love the PvP multiplayer, but sadly the developers just didn't really. I think this is like another Helldivers 2 issue where they probably never anticipated the fanfare that it would get. And I think this is the game that died off once again. Games don't last very long in this ecosystem. I enjoyed the gameplay for what it was. It felt like a pure video game in that regard. Like no nonsense, no like RPG mechanics that I have to worry about. The story did not get in the way of the gameplay at all. They were just spawn in and go to town. Skill versus skill. Who's the better player? Just pure action. And it was a lot of fun while it lasted, but as an overall game, the overall package is very disappointing, but I'm going to give it best gameplay because I think it's the closest thing to what a true video game should be, even though other aspects of it were not so good. And my game of the year is simply Metaphor. I think that this year started off looking promising. Some people will give it to, you could go for something different like best multiplayer game. Could be Marvel Rivals, could be something else, could be Path of Exile, but that game hasn't released yet, and it's only going to be in early access, according to what they say. Those are the only other games I can think of that we haven't already fielded. I mean, I don't think it's Like a Dragon. I think that was a little disappointing. I still liked it. That was very early on this year. I liked that game. I liked Persona Remake. I didn't play Unicorn. Those are like Atlas Sega games. And those games have gotten plenty of attention. Final Fantasy Rebirth potentially could win on some people's lists. I don't care about Black Myth Ruhan. I don't care about Stellar Blade, as I call it, Stellar Bait, because it's just people just sold that game based on the sexuality of the characters, not on the gameplay. Gameplay if you're looking at it from a critical lens, wasn't that amazing for the genre. Disappointing in a lot of ways because they decided to go and try and mishmash. They wanted to mishmash many different genres together that just are not as cohesive as they thought that they would be. And that was kind of a cop-out because they didn't want to fine-tune the systems. They didn't want to fine-tune the gameplay as they could have and should have. I think Metaphor is a celebration of what JRPGs have always been. It's a very bold game in terms of its narrative choices. It's not the most bold game in terms of its gameplay, but I mean, not very many games in this era are trying to do that. Again, maybe Path of Exile, maybe some people are even saying Hades, but I haven't played them. For me, the game that I liked the best all the way around, I am, of course, an Atlas fan. Sort of a wish fulfillment for me to put Metaphor, but this is just my list and my choice, and I have to do a video like this. I review games on this channel, and this is my choice. This is my gamer's perspective, trying to do a much shorter version than what the Game Awards will do. And I'm not going to take up any more time. Tell me in the comments if you got this far. What are your choices, and what are some of the categories that you would have put on here? And what are your best games of the year? I think that, we put a little bit too much emphasis on the elitism. I think we have to have objective conversations about what games do well and what they don't do well and what they should be doing for the medium. But I think that you can have more than one game. You can have more than one choice. Maybe not more than one favorite. You have to kind of choose your favorites at times, but celebrating the best and the worst of the year, it doesn't always just have to come down to a single pick. We should be having a conversation broadly about the best games all the way around, but I want to focus on games that are really trying to be games and really being honest about what they are and not trying to just copy trends. I don't like Stellar Blade doing that. I don't like, to a lesser extent, Black Myth doing that, in my view. A little bit harsh, some people might say, but I like games that really feel like they're made by people who love to design games and aren't just chasing after what they think is popular. So that's my perspective, and hopefully next year will be just as good, if not better, for games.